Right, okay, let's make a start now. My name is Rose Wiles. I'm a researcher at National Centre for Research Methods Hub at the University of Southampton, and very pleased to welcome you to this What Is session. We've got 4 presentations this morning with 5 speakers. The first one is looking at what is missing data in qualitative research. Secondly, looking at what is quantitative longitudinal research. Thirdly, looking at what is participatory research, and finally looking at what is participatory video. The speakers are going to speak for around 25 minutes each, and we have lots of time for questions, so about 20 minutes for questions. So I'll hand first to our first speakers. So Graham Crowe is going to speak first, followed by Alison Pell on what is missing data in qualitative research.
Okay, thank you. This session is a little bit different from most of the other What Is presentations, because most of the other What Is presentations are about a specific method or a specific methodological approach and so on. But the festival is nothing if not diverse, and we thought there would probably be room for us to talk about a project that we've been involved in about missing data in qualitative research. So here's the outline of what I and Alison, who's going to come up and take over from me shortly, are going to do in this presentation, and then we'll both handle the questions after we finish talking. So we're going to be talking a bit about the background to the project, talk a bit about types of what we're calling missing data, and we do have that in quote marks, and then we ask about these issues of missing for whom, how, why, and what's at stake, and then go on to talking about addressing missing data in qualitative research. So in terms of the background of the project, at the National Centre for Research Methods, the hub and nodes get together every year for an annual centre meeting, and at one such event a couple of years ago, our quantitative colleagues were having a session devoted to missing data, and they were talking about things like non-response in surveys and how they handle that issue of missing data. And the qualitative researchers who were there, including Rose and myself, sort of looked at each other, and then in the break we got to saying, well, is there an equivalent in qualitative research to what our quantitative colleagues have been talking about very animatedly and with great enthusiasm as the problem of missing data in quantitative research? So we said, well, yeah, that's quite interesting, and the more we talked, the more we found there were points of connection and ideas that seemed worth pursuing. So we put in a bid for a collaborative project within NCRM, which was successful, and the 6 of us involved in that team are myself and Rose Wiles from the NCRM Hub, Amanda Coffey from Wizard, and the Oxford node of the National Centre for E-Social Science, Alison here, and Bill Dutton, and also Libby Bishop from, she wears 2 hats, Qualidata and Timescapes. And we kind of got together because we thought, yes, actually there is something here that we think would benefit from spending a bit more time thinking about this. So our proposal is, it's a very small project, but nevertheless hopefully throwing up some interesting findings, and it involves a literature review, interviews and focus groups with research. And one of the things that we did early on was just to kind of swap anecdotes and stories, and so some of you may have been in the audience yesterday when I was talking about community studies, so if you were, you've heard this story already, but I was throwing into these group discussions the issue of that Jeff Payne has pointed out, which is that he said when he reads community studies, classic community studies, they seem to be very full of nice people. You know, where are all the people who are awkward or difficult, or just kind of the people you try and avoid? How is it that in these accounts those people don't seem to figure in these particular communities? So, as Jeff put it, the main impression generated by classic community studies is of a world populated with pleasant, likable people, and that's fair enough, and if the world were like that, that's fine. But one finds oneself scratching one's head and saying, well, yeah, but what about all those kind of other people? How is it that they're missing from these accounts? And he goes on to say that in his own experience of fieldwork over in different contexts and over a period of time, he had encountered a number of people who he didn't get on with. They were unpleasant. He went back to Bethnal Green and was confronted by someone who engaged him in conversation and led off on a tirade of rather racist views about how Bethnal Green had changed in the interim. And so he's left with this conclusion that actually something is going on that's screening out people who don't qualify as somehow or other nice enough to figure in these accounts. And that's a problem of selective sampling and selective reporting. So people who we're somehow uncomfortable with are somehow screened out from the process of community research. And so that was an example. And we thought, well, maybe there are lots of other examples. So as we talked to other people, they also came up with a number of similar sorts of stories and said, well, actually, yes, we think that as qualitative researchers, there's something that's going on here that is worth talking about further. And now I'm going to hand over to Alison to tell you a bit more about some of our findings. I should have added that, of course, this is ongoing research, so we're not at the very end of the project, and we're very much looking forward to the questions and comments when we finish the presentation part of this session.
Thank you very much, Graham. I want to extend my gratitude to the researchers who I've been working with on this project, and it's actually very interesting, as we will see. So my name is Alison Powell. I'm a research fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute, and you may be wondering why somebody from the Internet Institute is doing a project on qualitative research, but I hope that will become clear as we go through talking about the different contexts in which we encounter missing data. So in this project, we were interested in looking at elements of the research process where qualitative researchers negotiate with the potential for either missing data, for example, the kinds of things that Graham was talking about bad sampling or non-representative groups of people being used to tell a story about a broader context, or indeed cases where data can go missing. So we conducted interviews with 17 qualitative scholars, and we looked for people who were sort of across the range of qualitative research interests, and also who were ranging from early career researchers to more senior researchers. There was a particular interest from the NCES Oxford node in people who were doing online research. So we interviewed people who had done research using the internet, about the internet, or using online mediation as one of their research tools. We also we were quite interested, as we'll see, in questions of power. So we looked to find researchers who had been working in contexts where they were either studying up quite a bit and studying people who were much more powerful than they, or who were studying down, studying people who had much less power or who were potentially marginal. So because of this diversity, we were interested in focusing around a few issues that the existing literature revealed to be poorly understood. So our core research questions included: how do we deal with information made known to us by research participants, but we are made aware of on condition that it is not written down or attributable, which is the first off-the-record remarks. One of the second research questions was about sensitive information that requires anonymization. And then the third was a question about transcription, translation, and other kinds of mediation. So that's the mediated research findings. We also asked people about doing teamwork, because we noticed that people that research is often presented quite differently by different members of a team. And finally, what happens when items go into a box in an archive, and later on, researchers return and look to see that what is in the box is not what's expected. They don't understand it, or in fact, that the box is empty. And of course, everyone has a story about this. My story about the box of missing data had to do when I was doing fieldwork in France, collected a huge amount of information, put it all in a box, put it in the mail, and it never arrived. So because of this experience, which happened during the course of my PhD and traumatized me fundamentally for many months after, I was quite interested in some of the philosophical questions, like do I stop knowing about the things that were in the box? What happens to my research project when I can't refer to what's in the box? So with some of these questions, I think are quite interesting to look at. So we're going to start with off-the-record remarks. Yeah, whatever. There we go. So off-the-record comments, many of our interviewers brought up this question of what do you do with research that's off the record? And one of the things that was very interesting about how people talked about research participants wanting to go on the record or off the record is actually that reveals a power negotiation that researchers don't often acknowledge. And the reason I put this picture of myself up there, saying no, please, no photographs, is because I'm a totally uninteresting person. But in the moment in which I'm having somebody take my picture, I have the opportunity to say, oh, no. So I'm making myself much more powerful in that moment by refusing, or apparently refusing, to have my photograph taken. So I chose that for a very specific reason, because both myself and my friend are acknowledging the fact that we are totally public in this moment, but we're actually increasing our power by pretending to resist having our image recorded that way. So because our participants were both studying up and studying down, they had different responses to this idea of going on the record. We tend to think of as researchers of data off the record as being something that's the really important data. We attend to that much more because the participant has said, no, I don't want to go on the record as saying that. But some of the insights that we've been finding from our focus groups and interviews are that going on the record is a way for research participants to actually establish their own power. Similarly, saying no, I'm off the record on this is also a way of research participants attempting to gain power. So one of the examples that came out of our research was of pharmaceutical executives negotiating with their media representatives in order to talk to a researcher. And the media representative saying, no, that's on the record, that's off the record. This is also related to how you identify your research sources. So a very powerful person may want to be identified with their on-the-record comments in order to make them part of the public record. Similarly, they may want to refuse to have those comments be part of the public record as a way of drawing more attention to them. So this idea of, this is the question. This is what I'm doing with the hand up. No, please don't pay any attention to me. The sort of final thing that came up with regard to off-the-record comments is that off-the-record comments may not be as significant as participants think they are. And one of our interviewees was discussing studying politicians and party conferences and noting that people will be very, very protective of information that they think is really important, but depending on on your research questions, that information may be completely trivial. It's just that the researcher often has a very different perspective on what's important and what is not. So we can't objectively take what research participants themselves think to be incredibly salient, interesting, or significant information to be. So the next major theme is this question of ethically sensitive material, which is again has to do with how research participants are identified and also has to do with the power negotiation between researchers and the people that they're working with. Again, people may insist that they are publicly identified, and that may change the way that their remarks are framed. They also, through anonymization, we tend to think as researchers, again, that we have a lot of power and we have the power to anonymize the contexts in which we're researching. But in fact, these contexts change over time. So one of our interviewees was talking about working in the informal economy, in the sort of nighttime economy. and talking to people whose work is legal, but which is not necessarily socially acceptable, such as lap dancing, for example. And the idea that people within that particular community of practice will say, yes, please, I want to be identified because I'm not doing anything illegal, my business is totally legitimate. But because of the nature of that business, that entire economy, researchers still have a responsibility to think not just of the context as it is in the moment, but also to project into the future. And that has to do as well with the context in which we're publishing our research. If we're publishing our research in a way that is connected to the media, if the media is likely to be interested in our research results, as they were, for example, in the context of my interviewer's work, that's a sort of double burden to consider, not just the situated and contextual ethics, but also the broader ethical norms that have to do with a set of shifting contexts. So the context in which you do the research is not the context in which you will be living in the future, nor the context in which your research participants will be living in the future. And the photograph I have here was taken during a protest march in central London, and this is a photograph of me taking a photograph of somebody taking a photograph of me. So that police camera person has an image of me, and depending on what happens in the future, that image of me taking a picture of the photographer will have a very different context than it did on that day, which was in 2006. Subsequently, there have been legal changes and some challenges about the rights of people to actually take photographs in public places in London. And so that's another, it's another example just of how the context in which we live as people moving through time can be quite different than the context in which we think of ourselves as doing research. So another interesting sort of situation where we encounter missing data is in archived data, and there are two ways in which archived data might go missing, and one of which is obviously the box is empty. The second of which is a quite conventional critique of archiving material, which is that some of the context is missing. There are different perspectives on this. It's not simply that the context of, for example, the names of people in archived material are blocked out. It might also be the context in which that research was conducted, which is very difficult to represent in an archive. So one of the people that I interviewed said, well, my problem with archived data is that the entire process of doing research is a process of immersing and surrounding yourself with material. And when I go into an archive, I don't understand how that researcher immersed themselves and surrounded themselves and constructed their own research project. And so that context is missing from the archive. Another element that is missing from archived materials is actually a sense of the context of that particular material itself. So we did some interviews with scholars in the digital humanities, and one of the insights that they put forward was that easy access to information digitally. For example, this is a drawing that I timed how long it took me to find a drawing from Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks on the British Library site, and it's approximately 90 seconds. And this is an important point in terms of the changing contexts of doing research. That could have been somebody's entire research project to locate the notebook of Leonardo da Vinci, to find this image from his notebook. And so what has been missed is actually the sense, the context of this original document. So the scholars in the digital humanities said it's a real challenge to teach their students about what it was like for materials to be rare. And my PhD is in communication studies, so I know that Elizabeth Eisenstein has a very nice argument about how few people would have, in the time of Leonardo da Vinci, had access to this information. And so that context has now gone missing. The information is completely immediately locatable, and we have much more different kinds of contexts because our archiving is working differently with the internet and very robust searchable digital archives. Brings me to mediated research contexts, and one of the first that I'm going to talk about is online research. And again, I think there's quite an interesting balance here of what is missing or missed, and then what new contexts are added on. And I think these are sort of the Janus face of this entire discussion of missing data. So of course the Internet Institute was particularly interested in understanding the context of mediation in online research. And one of the really nice things about doing this research now, as opposed to 10 years ago, is that people are much more accepting that doing research online is part of doing social research. It's one context among many. And yes, of course, there will be different elements that won't come out as strongly in the interactions you can observe online that you would be able to observe in other social settings. But we no longer have this idea that that online interactions are completely bereft and that they are free of social context or social cues. And again, I've chosen a picture. It's very difficult to see on the projector, but in this situation, I'm also in this picture. People are interacting online and in a physical space in a multitude of different ways. They are talking to each other, they are sending messages, they are chatting online, and there are multiple contexts that are layered. And so I think this is one of the things that that's interesting to think about in terms of online research, that yes, some things are missing in purely looking at online research, but those contexts are also related to other contexts. So internet research provides really good access to hidden or marginalized groups. If you're interested, for example, in studying, one of our interviews was studying biologists and how they use lists to negotiate the boundaries of their own knowledge. Another one of our participants was looking at sex workers online, because this is one of the very sort of established ways of gaining autonomy through sex work is actually by being able to use the internet as one platform that, because it changes the context, it actually can make women who are operating as escorts safer, because that removes some of the more dangerous interpersonal physical contexts. But online research can also obscure other contexts of interaction. For example, the interviewee who was doing the project on the biologist said, we might think that people's interactions on their email listserv are completely representative of this community of online biologists, but they're not. And the only way of being able to figure out how people's interactions on the list is different than their engagements with the field of biology in other ways is by interviewing them individually and actually really getting very deep down into their context. Finally, there's a sort of looming challenge for both missing and recontextualizing qualitative information, which is that the structural features of the internet, such as search algorithms, configure how data is gathered, and these are opaque to us. So if I am interested in finding out about some community online and I use a Google search, the algorithm that Google search is based on is going to be entirely related to my previous searches. That information, the way that the Google algorithm actually operates, is completely opaque to me. I don't know how my results are different than Graham's results, even if we may be searching for the same information. So that becomes a way that data can be missed right from the beginning, from the very basic sort of superficial internet search. So again, this is a bit of the researchers that we've talked to are quite conscious of online research contexts as having lots of opportunities to gain access to marginalized groups, lots of new contexts, but also lots of contexts in which the information that we're seeking at the basic level, and also the information about the social worlds and interactions of participants, may be quite opaque to us. The second element of mediated research contexts that we focused on was around transcription and translation. Transcription is actually rarely examined as a construction of data. There's some good work by Vigouroux. But translation is actually studied quite extensively in translation studies. However, I don't think that many qualitative researchers who are working in translation actually are reflexive about this part of their practice. Some of us speak more than one language, and perhaps if we do, we're a bit more mindful about the fact that the information that we gather in one language is only really sensible in that language at the most profound and philosophical level. But if we can't all speak all languages in the world, so therefore as researchers, if we're interested in researching with people who speak different languages and come from different cultural backgrounds, we will have to use translators. And so the people who we interviewed obviously expressed a huge interest in the trust relationship between a researcher and a translator, and some actually said that translators really are researchers, and so that we need to acknowledge and value that contribution to making sense that translators provide. The other element of knowledge construction that has to do with transcription and translation is the cultural context in which you're conducting research and the way that the research is actually designed. Some of our participants who work in post-conflict zones, and particularly in Africa, note that things get lost in translation before you even begin the research. Your research questions may not be sensible to the people that you're working with. If they are completely divorced from the context, no matter what information you gather from people, no matter what data you get, you will still be missing something really fundamental because you haven't understood the cultural context in which that research is occurring. So that's, again, a very sort of philosophical level, but it is a practical research choice. Practical research choice needs to begin with understanding the context in which research is happening, whether that's in another country, in another language, or in some kind of mediated context, such as doing research. So, missing for whom? I mean, as I've described here, data can be missing for the researcher. Some of this has to do with technical faults or gaps. And the ethical reasons that we edit or censor data, which may have to do with the power that we feel that we hold, or the power that our interviewees are attempting to wield in our relationship. Members of research teams obviously pay attention to different information. And audiences are quite sensitive to missing data as well. I mean, you need to fundamentally, as we're writing up our research, make a credible and believable set of findings. Many of the people that I spoke to talked about targeting research findings, particularly people working in policy areas. Government and policy have a whole different set of concerns, but that does not mean that you can miss part of your essential set of findings communicating to them. Missing how, I think that there are three elements: ethics, philosophy, and functionality, and they're all related. We make very pragmatic research decisions at every stage of our research design, our data collection, and our analysis and writing up. And these very pragmatic decisions have ethical and philosophical implications that we actually quite regularly balance and discuss. And in philosophical terms, there's a big difference between missing the point, i.e. doing bad research, and actually missing things, because we inevitably miss things. We miss opportunities, we miss the perfect respondent. But the important thing is not to miss. And what's at stake? Researchers have power, participants have power, and audiences have power. And I think just to sort of sum up, the anonymity must be considered in terms of future audiences and future impacts. And of course, researchers are making inevitable choices between who's in, who's out, who are we going to talk to, who are we not going to talk to. And those have to be considered in terms of our evolving research questions, the iterative process that we're going through as we're actually doing our research, and how convincing and believable we want our findings to be, and to whom. Our participants have power. They get to choose what they're going to tell us. And as one of our participants pointed out, sometimes you will find out later that someone never told you something that was really important. This is also inevitable. The participants have the power to be silent, to say no, or to talk around an issue. And of course, audiences have power, and we're not totally in control either of which parts of our research findings are going to be reported by whom after them. So some conclusions. I mean, to a conventional quantitative researcher, the only good solution to missing data problem is not to have any. Obviously, this is not an appropriate solution for qualitative researchers. This is not how our research practice operates. But qualitative researchers still need to reflect on the choices that we make in design, collection, analysis, archiving, and reuse. And in our opinion, one of the sort of initial, very significant findings of this project is, in fact, that missing data is an important heuristic for thinking about research quality within qualitative research. So I'm going to invite Graham to join me here, and I'll open the floor to questions. Thank you very much.